The morning I buried my husband, the bishop was already thinking about who I would marry next. I did not know it yet. I was standing in my own kitchen, 43 years old, my hands still smelling of the soil we had lowered him into, and 3 women from the church were washing my dishes as if the plates themselves were grieving. And through the window I saw them. 3 men in black hats standing by the fence, not speaking, just looking toward the house, toward me. And something in the way they stood, patient, certain, the way you stand when you are waiting for something that already belongs to you, told me that my morning was not mine. It had a schedule, and I was already behind it. Before I tell you what those men were allowed to do to me over the next 12 years and what they did, let me introduce myself. My name is Anna. I grew up and grew old in an old order Amish settlement in Holmes County, Ohio, and I lived under the Ordnung for 61 years before I walked out with a suitcase and my mother's Bible and nothing else. This is Hannah the Amish Girl, the channel where women like me finally say the things we were never permitted to say aloud. If you want to understand what Amish life is truly like, not the postcard, not the tourist buggy ride, but the truth from someone who lived every day of it, subscribe and tap the like button. And tell me in the comments, what do you think a widow owes her community? I want to hear what you believe before I tell you what they believed. Let me explain something the outside world does not understand, because without it, nothing I tell you tonight will make sense. In the Amish world, a woman alone is not simply a woman alone. She is a problem to be solved. A widow with a farm, with children still at home, with cattle and a garden and a household, is not seen as independent. She is seen as incomplete and worse, as a temptation to disorder. The Ordnung, our unwritten but iron code, is built on a single foundation that every soul belongs inside a structure. A man leads a household, a woman keeps it, a child obeys, and a widow is a crack in the wall. She fits nowhere, and a thing that fits nowhere must be put somewhere quickly before others start to wonder why it is allowed to remain loose. There is a word in our world for a woman like me, and I did not learn it until I was already living it. Sitzgeblieben. It means roughly one who has stayed sitting. It is the word for a woman who was not chosen, or who did not choose, and so remained where the music left her. It is not spoken cruelly. That is the thing I need you to understand. It is spoken kindly, the way you would name a sickness, with a lowered voice and a look of soft pity. And that softness is the sharpest part of it. Cruelty you can push against. Pity closes over you like water. When the women said it about me, and they did, I heard them once through an open window at a canning frolic. They were not being unkind. They were grieving me. They had decided I was a tragedy, and they had decided it together. And there is no argument you can win against a whole community's tenderness for the woman they have agreed you have become. When my husband Amos died, I was not a young woman. I was 43, which in our world is already past the age when remarriage is romantic. Remarriage for a widow my age was never about love. It was about order, about putting the farm back under a man's name, about making sure the district did not have to look at a woman running her own affairs and start asking dangerous questions about whether a woman could. The first proposal came 6 weeks after the funeral. 6 weeks. I was still finding his handwriting on feed sacks in the barn. A widower named Eli, 20 years older than me, whose own wife had been in the ground less than a year. The bishop brought him to my door on a Sunday afternoon like a man delivering a horse. Eli sat in my front room, hat on his knee, and told me that his children needed a mother, and my farm needed a man, and that God had clearly arranged both needs to answer each other. He did not ask me a question. He informed me of a conclusion. I said no. I want you to understand what those 2 letters cost, because in my world, a woman did not simply decline. Declining was not a right. It was a negotiation, and I was the only party without leverage. I said no, and I watched the bishop's face change, not angry, worse than angry. Disappointed the way you are disappointed in a child who has not yet learned that the stove is hot. He would let me touch the stove, his face said. He would let me learn. Here is what people outside my community will not believe, and I need you to hear it slowly. When a widow refused to remarry in my district, there was no law that punished her. There was no rule written anywhere that said what would happen. That is the whole trick of it. The ordning does not need to be written to be enforced. What the elders were allowed to do to me was never a punishment on paper. It was a slow, patient tightening of everything that made my life livable, and every turn of the screw could be explained as concern, as love, as the community simply caring for a soul in danger. Let me tell you what caring looked like. First, they came for the money, though they never called it that. My farm needed repairs no woman could do alone, they said, and so the men of the district would come and do them, and I would be grateful, and I was, at first. But the men who came reported back how much grain was in my bin, how my fences were holding, what my late husband's tools were worth. My private household became a public account, read aloud, I later learned. At meetings I was not invited to. I did not own my farm. I administered it on behalf of a community that had decided quietly that it was holding my property in trust until I came to my senses and handed it to a husband. Then they came for my children. I had 4 still at home when Amos died. The bishop began to suggest, gently, always gently, that a household without a father was a spiritually unsafe place for children, that my sons needed a man's discipline, that my daughters needed to see a proper marriage modeled, or how would they ever build their own? Within 2 years, my 2 oldest boys were spending more time on other men's farms than on mine, placed there for their own good, and I understood the message underneath the arrangement. Your family is not whole. We can make it wholer. All you have to do is say yes. I said no again and again, and the no's began to cost more each time. I want to tell you about the winter of the 4th year because it was the year I understood exactly how the tightening worked. My barn roof came down under the snow, a beam that Amos would have known was weak, that I did not know, because the knowing had died with him, and no one had thought a woman needed to inherit it. And so I did what any household does. I sent word that I needed a barn raising. In my world, this is the great mercy of Amish life. The thing the tourists photograph, dozens of men arriving at dawn to rebuild what one family lost, asking nothing. And they came. They did come. But before they came, the bishop came first, and he sat in my front room. And he said that the district was glad to raise my barn. Of course they were. We are one body. But he wondered, gently, always gently, whether it was wise to keep pouring the community's strength into a farm that had no man to carry it forward, whether it might not be kinder to everyone, and to me most of all, if the farm passed to a household that could hold it. He did not say, give up your land. He said, let us love you properly. And the barn went up that spring with 40 men on the beams, and every single nail of it was a question I was expected to answer with my surrender. I did not surrender, but I paid for the barn in a currency they never named, and the currency was this. After that winter, the help came slower. Not refused, never refused, just slower. The man who used to bring my hay by the second week of the month began bringing it by the fourth. The boy sent to help with my heavy plowing arrived later in the season each year, until one spring he did not arrive at all, and no one ever explained why, and I understood that I was not being punished. I was being taught. The lesson was patient, and it was wordless, and it said, "This is how hard your life becomes when you refuse the easy answer we are holding out to you. Say yes, and the hay comes early. That is not a fist. There is no fist anywhere in it. That is what makes it the thing it is." There were 11 Sundays over those years that I will carry to my grave. 11 specific Sundays where the counting happened, where the pressure was not a suggestion but a ceremony. And I have to be honest with you now before I go on. What happened over the next 11 Sundays, I cannot carry it in 20 minutes. There are things this recording cannot hold. The names, the counting, the drawer, the dress I kept for 27 years. 3 years ago, I wrote it all down. The book is called The Sundays. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. But I will give you what I can hold here. My friend Katie was widowed 3 years before me, and Katie said yes. Katie remarried within the year to a man the district chose, and I watched what saying yes did to her. She grew quiet in a way that was different from peace. At the quilting frolics, she stitched with her head down and did not laugh any more, and once, only once in the pantry while we fetched more thread, she took my wrist and said 4 words to me. "Do not do it." That was all. "Do not do it." And then an older woman came in for more batting, and Katie let go of my wrist and picked up her thimble and became again the quiet, obedient wife the community had built out of the woman she used to be. I never forgot the grip of her hand. It was the grip of someone reaching up out of water. So I did not do it. And here is what refusing looked like, year after year. It looked like the shunning that was not officially a shunning. No one declared me under the ban. That would have required a reason, a formal charge, a vote. Instead, I was simply left out. My name stopped appearing on the lists for hosting church. The younger women stopped asking me to teach them to can and to quilt, because their mothers had told them, without ever quite saying it, that Anna was a cautionary tale and not a teacher. At weddings, I was seated at the far tables. When I spoke in a group, there would be a small silence afterward, and then the conversation would continue as if I had not spoken at all. Do you know what it is to become a ghost while you are still alive? To watch a whole community learn to look through you? That is what they were allowed to do. And every bit of it was deniable. Every bit of it was love. I want you to meet one more woman, because her story is the one that almost broke me, and I think it is the one you most need to hear. Her name was Maddie, and she was old when I was young, a widow who had refused, the only one I had ever known before. I became one myself. When I was a girl, the grown-ups spoke of Maddie the way you speak of a warning. She lived at the edge of the district in a small house, and she came to church, and no one was ever cruel to her, and she was the loneliest human being I have ever seen with my own eyes. As a child, I did not understand it. I thought she had done something. It was only after Amos died, only after the men stood at my fence, that I finally understood Maddie had done nothing at all, except the same thing I was doing, and that the district had spent 30 years turning her slowly into furniture, present at every gathering, spoken to by no one under 60. And I remember thinking, that is my road. That is the whole length of it, laid out in one small, stooped woman at the far table. And I have to tell you honestly, there were years I was more afraid of becoming Mattie than of anything the bishop could do, because the bishop's pressure at least treated me as a person worth pressing. Mattie's fate was worse. It was to be pressed until you were no longer worth the effort, and then simply left. I have to tell you about the bishop's visits because they were the heaviest turning of the screw. Twice a year, sometimes more, he would come and sit in my front room, the same room where Eli had once offered himself like a horse, and he would open the scriptures and read to me about the woman who submits, about the household of God, about pride, about Hashmut, the pride that is the root of all our sins. And he would look at me over the pages and say, Anna, is it not pride that keeps you alone? Is it not your own will you are serving and not God's? And I want you to understand the trap of that question, because it is the most Amish trap there is. If I said my refusal was not pride, I was arguing with the bishop, which is pride. If I said nothing, I was consenting. There was no answer that was not a confession. He built a box with no door in it, and then asked me why I would not leave. And here is something no one tells you about refusing for 12 years. It is not one large act of courage. That is the myth, and it is a comforting one, but it is a lie. Refusing is 10,000 small acts, most of them invisible, most of them exhausting. It is answering the same question at every wedding for over a decade. It is the way conversation stops when you walk toward a circle of women, and the way you learn to pretend you did not notice, because noticing is its own kind of defeat. It is lying awake on the night before every communion Sunday, when the district examines itself for anyone out of harmony, and wondering whether this is the year they finally name you. It is raising children inside a community that has quietly decided your children would be better off elsewhere, and loving them fiercely anyway, and watching them learn from everyone around them that their mother is a problem the district is being patient about. My youngest daughter asked me once when she was 9 why the other mothers looked at me the way they did, and I did not have an answer I could give a 9-year-old that would not have made her carry my weight. So I told her that some people are simply careful around a woman who knows her own mind. And she looked at me, and she said, "Is that a bad thing to be?" And I have thought about that question for the rest of my life. For 12 years, I did not leave that box. I lived in it. I raised what children they left me. I ran a farm they never let me own. I attended a church that had turned me into weather, into something present but not addressed. And I kept a dress in a drawer, a dress I will not describe here because I described it in the book and I cannot say it twice. A dress that was the whole story folded into cloth. And I took it out on those 11 Sundays, and I looked at it and I put it back, and I said, "No one more time to a room with no one in it. I am not going to pretend I left because I was brave. I want to be honest with you because the honesty is the only thing I brought out with me that was fully mine. I did not leave because I was strong. I left because I was 61 years old, and I finally understood something my whole community had spent my whole life making sure I would never think. They were never allowed to do any of it. That is the thing therapy gave me years later. Sitting in an office with an English woman who had never heard the word Ordnung and had to ask me to spell it. She listened to all of it, the farm, the boys, the seating at the far tables, The bishop and his box with no door. And she was quiet for a long time. And then she said something I have thought about every day since. She said, "Anna, control does not always look like a fist. Sometimes it looks like a whole community agreeing, all at once and without a single meeting, to make your life smaller every time you say no, until saying yes feels like air." And I understood then that the men by my fence on the morning of the funeral had not been enforcing a rule. There was no rule. They had been enforcing a fear, their own fear of what a woman alone might prove was possible. I do not tell you this to make you hate the Amish. I have to say that clearly, because it is true. That world gave me things I will carry until I die. A community that showed up for every birth and every burial without being asked. Hands that knew how to work. A faith that, wounded as it is, I have not been able to put down, and I no longer try to. There is real love in that world. I have felt it. But love and control learned to wear the same coat in my district, and for 12 years I could not tell you which one was knocking on my door, because they knocked exactly the same way. And here is the truth underneath all of it, the truth they were most afraid I would find. They were allowed to do so much to me, only because I believed they were allowed. The moment I stopped believing it, the box had a door. It always had a door. The door was the word no, spoken not to a bishop but to myself. No, I do not owe you my mourning. No, my farm is not a crack in your wall. No, my aloneness is not a sin waiting to be corrected. I kept that dress for 27 years to remind me of a woman I refused to become. And the day I left, I took it with me, and I own it now, the way I own nothing else, completely. If you have ever lived in a place where your grief came with a deadline, I see you. If you have ever been made into weather, present but never addressed, spoken through instead of spoken to, I see you. If anyone ever taught you that your survival alone was an act of pride, hear me now. It was never pride. It was the bravest ordinary thing a person can do. You did not owe them your yes. You never did. The Sundays, what 20 minutes cannot hold. The link is in the description and the pinned comment. The morning is yours if you decide it is. If this reached something in you, tell me in the comments what part stayed with you. And if you want to keep hearing the truth from behind the prayer cap, subscribe to Hannah the Amish Girl. There is so much I have not yet said. Until next time, choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life. That's the full script at 3,596 words, within your 3,400, 3,600 range. It keeps the analyzed structure intact. The frozen cold open scene, the delayed intro with the comment prompt CTA, the let me explain ethnographic pivot, the aged up old order details, widowed at 43, 61 years under the ordnung, the named side characters used as archetypes, Eli, Katie, Maddie, both mid-video and closing CTAs placed as you specified, the therapy reframe, the both sides softening, the direct address benediction, and the signature sign-off.